Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Nile, and I'm addressing the apparent, incredible dysfunction within the Republican Party these days. You know, the Republicans are experiencing what I consider to be blowback. Now, blowback is an unintended consequence of some action or another that one's taken in the past. It's my view that the Republicans are experiencing blowback from having used successfully for some time their Southern strategy. Now, the Southern strategy was enacted in response to the fact that Barry Goldwater, the 1968 Republican nominee for president, won 5 Southern states, 5 formerly totally democratically entrenched Southern states. You see, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had just been passed, integrating all public facilities, and a lot of Southern white Americans were, well, really afraid of what might happen in the future through integration. And so they went solidly for the Republican, because it was a Democratic president, of course, President Johnson, who signed the Civil Rights Act of '64. So the next Republican presidential nominee, Richard Nixon, noticed that, and the Republican Party noticed that. Richard Nixon's campaign noticed that and thought, oh my goodness, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, brought integration. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, which tried to eliminate discrimination in voting based on race, primarily for the benefit of African Americans. Southern whites are scared. We can do something with that. And so what you did, very cynically, is started playing on those fears, playing on what for many was actual animosity toward African Americans. You created a villain. You essentially said to Southern white America and white Americans from all over the country who were mostly low information voters, poor working class white Americans, you said, listen, it's the blacks, it's their fault. You can't get ahead because of all of those big government programs paying for their food stamps, paying for their welfare checks. And it's your tax dollars that are paying for it. In fact, in a 1970 interview with the New York Times, Richard Nixon's political strategist, Ken Phillips, said the following, in part, quote, "From now on, the Republicans are never going to get more than 10 to 20% of the Negro vote. And they, the Republicans, don't need any more than that. But Republicans would be short-sighted if they weakened enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, because the more Negroes that register as Democrats in the South, the sooner the Negrophobe whites will quit the Democrats and become Republicans." Unquote. And that strategy worked for you for 2 or 3 decades. You transformed the South into a solidly Republican demographic. No question. Well, having seen that success, what you then did, American Republicans, Republican Party, is you thought, we're going to do something similar, but this time with Democrats. We're going to make them the villain. And so you then engaged in a campaign of trying to villainize Democrats in every way you could. In fact, you said to yourselves, we're not going to even call it the Democratic Party anymore, because after all, Democratic sounds rather nice. We're going to call it the Democrat Party. And we're going to vilify them in every way possible. In the not too distant past, in 1994 in fact, with the GoPack memo, you even passed out a list of contrasting words that Republicans should use in describing Democrats versus Republicans. For your own party, for the Republican Party, you said they should use words like moral and prosperity, courage, opportunity, children, family, legacy. To describe Democrats, the memo reads, you should use words such as failure, liars, unionized bureaucracy, pathetic, destructive, sick. And so your strategy was to make Republicans hate Democrats, actually despise them. Your strategy was to make your constituency believe that Democrats were dangerous, that they were, among other things, giving this country away to people of color, to Americans of color, and that it was up to the Republicans to help them, white America, take their country back. You did a great job of it. One thing you know how to do is villainize. But you see, the world is a round place, and what goes around comes around. So what you're now experiencing, Republicans, is some serious blowback. Because you told all of those angry people that you created, or whose anger you encouraged, I should say, you told them that you needed to vote them in so that you could go to Washington and throw the bums out. Throw the Democrats out. Now you know, and you knew then, that you can't just throw people out, people with whom you have political disagreements, because we live in a democracy under a constitution, which you're constantly touting, by the way. So you knew so good and well you couldn't just throw out the Democrats. But you knew that the people whom you were speaking to didn't know that. You knew that they were low information voters, that the working class and white Republicans whom you were courting were civically unsophisticated. And so you promised them, vote for us and we'll throw them out. Well, when you did not throw the Democrats out, because you couldn't under our Constitution, guess what they did? They got angry at you and said, okay, you're not throwing the bums out? We'll send people to Congress to throw the bums out. And while we're at it, we'll throw you out for not having thrown them out. And so what you're experiencing is just that. The monster that you have created, come home. The chickens have come home to roost. You know, it's been said in many other ways. She or he who lives by the sword shall die by the sword. If you live, yes, by the sword, you'll die by the sword. And there are other sayings too. But essentially, that's it. The chickens have come home to roost. You've created a monster, and now that monster is biting you in the back in a serious way. I feel sorry for you, because we need a two-party system in the United States. We need Democrats and Republicans to see issues differently and then try to convince the American people of the correctness of their view. In a real sense, I'm sorry that this is happening to you to that extent. But you created this monster. Now you have to live with it. It's interesting to watch. We'll see what happens.